Wyoming Territory, 1884. At the edge of Louisa Merrow's land stood 3 markers, cut from the same gray stone by the same tired hand, because she had cut them herself each time, and set close together under a single cottonwood, so that whoever tended one could tend all 3 without walking far. Ephraim Merrow had gone first, thrown from a green horse in a spring storm. Then Daniel Cole, dead of a fever that took half the county that winter, and none of them so young. Then Amos Cole, Daniel's own brother, who married her 2 years after, and broke through river ice, hauling a calf out of a current that should have been frozen solid in November and wasn't. 3 husbands, 3 names carved by the same hands into the same soft stone. The town had a word for that, and the word was not widow. The word, said low over church socials and general store counters, was cursed. Louisa had stopped listening for the word years ago, or told herself she had. She was 34 now, and she ran 300 acres of grazing land alone. And she had gotten good at the particular kind of quiet that comes from being the only person in a house built for more. She fed herself first, because there was no one to feed after. She talked to the cattle because the cattle did not flinch when she came near, the way the women at the mercantile did, the way even kind people sometimes did, as if bad luck might be catching. She had made peace with that, or she had built something that looked enough like peace that she stopped checking whether it was real. I want to stop here for just a moment. This story has found its way to listeners in Brazil, in Nigeria, in the Philippines, in South Africa, in towns and cities I will never see with my own eyes. And if you are one of them tonight, hearing this for the first time, I am glad you are here. This channel is still young. We are only getting started, and every person who stops to listen makes it a little more possible to keep telling stories like this one. If it has found a place in you tonight, consider subscribing before you go. It costs nothing, and it means everything on this end. Now, let's get back to Louisa, because a man was about to ride onto her land who had not yet heard the word the town used for her. And that made him, without knowing it, the first person in 3 years to look at her without flinching first. His name was Silas Boone, and he had come west from Ohio the long way, through 2 failed claims and 1 failed marriage of his own, a wife who had left him for a man with better prospects and no patience for building something slow. He was 38, broad through the shoulders, from years of work that had never quite paid, and he had a way of looking at a piece of land and seeing what it could be in 5 years instead of what it was that morning. He came through Larkin Crossing looking for day work, and the blacksmith pointed him toward the Merrow place, because Louisa Merrow always needed hands and never kept them long on account of what everyone called her luck. Nobody told him why the hands never stayed. He found that out later, and by then it did not matter the way it was supposed to. She hired him to mend fence and clear brush along the north pasture, paid him fair, fed him at her table because it seemed a poor thing to make a man eat alone in a bunkhouse when there was a kitchen right there with room for 2. He noticed she never asked him to stay past dark. He noticed too that she watched him the way a person watches weather that might turn, careful, a little braced. 3 weeks in, he asked her directly why she flinched every time he reached for something heavy. She told him, all of it. Ephraim and the horse, Daniel and the fever, Amos and the river. She told it flat, without asking for pity, the way a person recites something they have said enough times that the words have worn smooth and stopped hurting the way they used to, or stopped showing that they still did. I've buried 3 husbands, she said, standing in her own doorway with the lamp behind her, so her face was half shadow. Most men hear that and find a reason to be somewhere else by morning. Silas did not leave by morning. He stayed through the fall, and when the fence work ran out, he found other work to do that did not run out quite so fast, and by the time the first hard frost came, he had asked her to marry him plainly without ceremony, standing in the same doorway where she had warned him off 3 months before. She warned him again because it seemed the honest thing to do. He married her anyway. This is the 14th story I've told on this channel, and if stories like this one mean something to you, I hope you'll consider subscribing and leaving the channel a like. It helps more than the number suggests. I want to ask you something while we sit here at the start of what comes next. Have you ever had people decide who you were before you got the chance to show them otherwise? A reputation that arrived in a room before you did? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what you're doing while this story keeps you company. I like knowing how far these evenings travel. Now let's get back to Larkin Crossing, because a wedding was about to become the least private thing that had happened in that town in a decade. Wyoming Territory in 1884 was still finding its legal footing on questions that mattered enormously to a woman like Louisa. Territorial law recognized a widow's dower right, generally a third interest in a deceased husband's estate, but a widow who remarried could find that interest contested, especially when the land in question bordered water rights that a growing cattle operation needed badly. The Merrow acreage ran along Willow Creek, one of the few reliable year-round sources in that stretch of country, and it had passed to Louisa cleanly through Ephraim, then through Daniel, then through Amos, each time surviving probate because each marriage had been plainly and legally her own choice, witnessed and recorded at the county seat. Her new marriage to Silas Boone changed the shape of that inheritance for the first time, because it introduced, for the first time, a man with no blood tie at all to any of the three families whose names were carved into that stone under the cottonwood. The man who noticed this fastest was Cyrus Fenwick, who ran the largest cattle operation in the county and had wanted Willow Creek water rights for 6 years, long before Louisa had ever been a widow at all. He had made offers, polite ones, through 3 different husbands and been turned down 3 times because Merrowland had never been for sale, only for working. With Amos gone and no children to inherit, and Louisa alone, Fenwick had let himself believe the 4th attempt might finally succeed, that a lone widow with a curse hanging over her might tire of the fight and sell. Silas Boone's arrival ended that hope, and Fenwick did not take the ending well. He began quietly, the way a man does when he still believes quiet will work. He reminded the county clerk, in passing, that a marriage entered so soon after a widow's 3rd burial might invite scrutiny, particularly from a stranger with no history in the territory and no family to vouch for him. He mentioned, at the saloon, that a man might marry a woman for land as easily as for love, and that 3 dead husbands left a fair amount of land behind for a 4th man clever enough to wait her out too. The word spread the way words do in small places, gathering weight it had not earned. By midwinter, the story making its way through Larkin Crossing was no longer that Louisa Merrow was unlucky. It was that Silas Boone might be something worse than unlucky himself, a man who had married a cursed woman on purpose, for reasons that had nothing to do with affection. Silas heard the talk the way a person always eventually hears talk meant to be kept from them, secondhand, from someone who thought he already knew. He came home that evening quiet, in a way Louisa had not seen from him before, and when she asked what was wrong, he told her plainly, because he had learned by then that plainness was the only language that worked between them. "They're saying I married you for the water," he said. "Fenwick's saying it loudest, but plenty are listening." Louisa sat with that for a long moment. She had spent 3 years bracing for people to look at her sideways. She had never once braced for someone to look at him that way, instead, on her account. "I could release you from it," she said finally, quiet. "The marriage. Nobody would think less of you for it, given what they already think of me." Silas set down his coffee and looked at her the way he had looked at that north pasture the day he arrived, seeing not what it was, but what it could hold. "I didn't marry you for water rights," he said. "I married you because you're the first person in 10 years who let me stay past dark without flinching. Fenwick can say whatever he wants. It doesn't make it true, and it doesn't change what I'm staying for." She wanted to believe that would be the end of it. It was not. Fenwick's next move was less quiet. He filed a petition with the county court that spring, arguing that the water allocation on Willow Creek, granted originally under Ephraim Merrow's name in 1868, should be reviewed given what he called the irregular succession of ownership through 3 marriages and a 4th husband with no prior claim to the territory. It was not strictly an attempt to take the land outright. It was an attempt to force a public accounting, a hearing where every death would be laid out again in front of the whole county, where Louisa would have to explain once more, and this time under oath, exactly how each husband had died and why a stranger from Ohio had married her so soon after the 3rd funeral. Fenwick understood something true about small towns, which was that a woman could survive being pitied for years. But a public hearing that made her explain herself like a suspect might finally break something that pity alone had never managed to break. The hearing was set for the first week of May at the county courthouse in Cheyenne, 80 miles from Larkin Crossing. Louisa spent the weeks before it barely sleeping, going back over each death in her mind as if she might find, on the 100th turning, some fact she had missed the first 99 times, some detail that would make the losses make sense to strangers who had never known any of the 3 men she had buried. Silas spent those same weeks doing something else. He rode to every neighboring ranch within 20 miles, and he talked to people, not about the curse, but about the actual facts, gathered plainly and without embellishment. He found the man who had been riding with Ephraim the day the green horse threw him and got him to agree to testify to the weather that morning, the mud on the trail, the horse's own known temper that 3 other men had complained of before Ephraim ever bought it. He found the doctor who had treated half the county during the fever Winter Daniel died in, and got the man's written account of the outbreak, 41 dead across the county in 6 weeks. Daniel, one name among many, nothing singular about his death, except that it had happened to Louisa's husband. He found 2 ranch hands who had been on the riverbank the day Amos went through the ice, who could describe the false thaw that November, warm enough to fool a careful man, cold enough underneath to kill him anyway. None of it was secret information. All of it had simply never been gathered in one place before, because nobody had ever thought Louisa's grief deserved that kind of careful attention. Only her reputation had. At the hearing, Fenwick's lawyer built his case on suggestion rather than accusation, careful never to say outright that Louisa had caused any of the deaths, only that the pattern was troubling, that the timing of the 4th marriage was troubling, that a territory still building its legal order ought to look closely before confirming water rights through a chain of such unusual circumstance. Silas asked the court's permission to speak, though he was, strictly, only the newest name on the deed and not required to say anything at all. He told them about the pasture he had come to mend, and the woman who had warned him off her own doorway before he had even asked to stay, and the 3 witnesses waiting outside who had ridden 80 miles on their own time and their own expense to explain, in plain terms, exactly how 3 ordinary and terrible accidents had happened to one unlucky woman in one hard stretch of country. "You can call it a curse if that's easier than calling it what it is," he said. "Bad weather, bad ice, a fever that killed 40 other people that same winter, and nobody's calling their families cursed. I'm not here because I didn't know what I was marrying into. I knew exactly what I was marrying into. I married her anyway, and I'd do it again tomorrow morning," the witnesses testified. The doctor's letter was read into the record. The judge, a practical man more interested in territorial precedent than in gossip, ruled that the water allocation stood exactly as it always had, unbroken through every marriage, and that Cyrus Fenwick's petition amounted to nothing the court recognized as legal grounds for review. Fenwick did not trouble the Merrow place again. Whatever hope he had carried for 6 years, he let it go quietly, the way men do when a fight has stopped being worth the cost of losing it publicly. The town's talk did not vanish overnight, because talk rarely does, but it changed shape. The word cursed came up less. What replaced it, slowly, over that summer and the next, was something closer to the truth Silas had said out loud in a Cheyenne courtroom, that hard things had happened to a woman who kept working through every one of them, and that a stranger from Ohio had looked at all of it plainly and decided to stay anyway. Louisa found that summer that she had stopped counting the days by what might go wrong next, She found herself reaching for Silas across the supper table, the way a person reaches for something they have started to trust will still be there tomorrow. Not because tomorrow is guaranteed to anyone in that country or any other, but because she had finally let herself stop bracing against it. 9 years passed. The cottonwood over the 3 markers had grown thick enough to shade the whole rise by then, and a 4th marker never joined the row, because Silas Boone lived to be an old man, gray and slower but stubborn as ever about mending his own fences, refusing help from the hands they eventually hired once the herd grew too large for 2 people to manage alone. Willow Creek still ran through Merrowland, renamed on no map but known locally, by then, as the Boone Place, though Louisa never bothered correcting anyone who still called it by her first name instead. On a warm evening in early September, the 2 of them sat on the porch that Silas had rebuilt their 2nd year together, wider than the old one, built for 2 chairs instead of 1. Louisa was 53 that year, her hair more silver than not, her hands still strong from decades of work she had never once been given the choice to set down and never much wanted to. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked him, watching the light go gold over the north pasture he had mended the very first week she knew him. "What the town used to say about me?" Silas considered the question the way he considered most things, slow and without hurry. "I think about the doorway," he said. "The night you told me. You said most men would find a reason to be somewhere else by morning. You remember that? I remember thinking you expected me to leave. And I remember thinking I'd never in my life met anybody who deserved less to be left." She reached over and took his hand, the way she had 1,000 evenings before that one, and would a good many more after, and neither of them needed to say anything further, because the cottonwood was still standing, and the water still ran, and the 4th name that the town had once whispered about with such suspicion had simply become, over 9 ordinary and unremarkable years, the name beside hers on a shared deed, on a shared porch, at the end of a shared life that no curse, real or invented by careful gossip, had ever managed to touch. I think about Louisa often, the way I think about anyone who spent years being defined by their worst luck instead of their actual character. It is an easy thing, from the outside, to look at somebody's losses and decide they explain the whole person. Easier still to repeat what everyone else is already saying, rather than ask whether it holds up under a plain look. The town needed a courtroom and 3 witnesses, and a stranger willing to say a hard true thing out loud before they saw Louisa Merrow clearly. Most of us will never get a courtroom. Most of us will only get the people willing to stay past the first warning, the ones who hear the worst of our story and decide to find out the rest of it anyway. If you have one of those people in your life, I hope you tell them so tonight. And if you are still waiting for one, I hope this story finds you exactly when you need to hear that waiting is not the same thing as being unlucky. Thank you for spending this evening here. I will see you in the next one.